Hey guys, my name is Leo Rempe, and today I will be presenting my research report to you. So my research was focused on the economic value created through rebuilding fisheries, with a specific focus on the Pacific bluefin tuna industry. So on my agenda, I'll give you an introduction to my research, tell you why I chose this research topic. Then I'll discuss the bluefin tuna and just talk about the fish itself. Then I'll talk about a few measures that are currently in place to protect this resource from overexploitation. From there, I'll talk about some economic reasoning. So I'll talk about economic theories that explain why these natural resources are being overexploited. From there, I'll discuss some bioeconomical models that are currently used within fisheries management to help in the creation of effective policies and regulations that promote sustainability. From there on, I will discuss some scenarios I created, which I'll be using to calculate the economic value of rebuilding the bluefin tuna industry. Then I'll talk about my results and talk about some limitations of my research. So essentially, the aim of my research is to provide you with an understanding of the importance and value of managing the world's fisheries at a sustainable level. Um, and I will show that there is economic value actually created through rebuilding fisheries and the implementation of sustainable fishing regulations and policies. So fisheries currently provide 180 million people with jobs worldwide and represent a significant percentage of protein consumed globally, which is expected to increase over the next couple of years. This creates a lot of concern for the fisheries, as the overexploitation will lead to the depletion of this natural resource. The OECD currently states that 28% of the world's fisheries are depleted or overexploited, and that a further 52% of the world's fisheries are operating at their maximum sustainable level. Therefore, it is vital that we develop an understanding of what is happening with the world fisheries and how improved fisheries management techniques can ensure increasing production under economically efficient conditions. So effectively, the sustainable management of a fishery. So the Pacific bluefin tuna, also known as Thanis orientalis, is a highly migratory species found in the North Pacific. It grows up to 3 meters and 540 kgs. It has become one of the most endangered commercial fish species in the world, and the whole industry is on the verge of collapse. Over 80% of bluefin tuna are exported to Japan, which is because of their high demand for the fish. And through these demand pressures, the price of bluefin tuna has increased dramatically over the last couple of years, with the fish being sold for $1.76 million a couple of years ago. As a result of this demand driven by Japanese customers, the stock of bluefin tuna in the North Pacific is said to have dropped by more than 96%, and over 90% of bluefin tuna that are currently caught are under the minimum production size. Studies also estimate that only around 40,000 adult Pacific bluefin tuna remain, and data indicates that these adult tunas are starting to reach the end of their natural life cycle, their natural lifespan, and that they are no longer able to reproduce. So with the majority of bluefin tuna being caught juvenile, and the adult tuna reaching the maximum life cycle, it limits the whole population's ability to reproduce. So effectively, without effective or strict measures to protect the species, the population will not recover. There are a few regulations and restrictions currently in place. There are two separate bodies that govern the bluefin tuna industry, and that is the Western and Central Pacific Fisheries Commission and the Inter-American Tropical Tuna Commission. They have implemented a few new regulations, such as the Inter-American Tropical Commission has said that they want to halve the catch of juvenile tuna per annum. So that's a step in the right direction, and also the recreational bag limit has been reduced to 2 fish today from 10 fish. However, the World Wildlife Fund actually argues that these measures are inadequate and they will not help to rebuild the stock due to the species biovulnerability, as well as the effects of illegal, unreported, and unregistered fishing. Okay, so let's talk about some economic reasoning. Hardin's theory, tragedy of the commons, is used to explain the overexploitation of fisheries. The theory states that the fish stock as a resource are market-free goods, so as a result, no one can claim ownership to these goods. So this essentially means that no single user has the right to pay for this resource, nor is he entitled to exclusive rights to the resource or the right to prevent others from sharing in its exploitation. So this effectively means that all commercial users of fisheries are in competition with each other to maximise their share of the resource, which would result in their largest maximisation of profits. However, as natural resources are limited, the exploitation of it will lead to its eradication. It is said that a rational human has more to gain by overusing a resource, as the effect of overexploiting one resource is shared across the whole industry. So by applying this to the fisheries industry, we can say that fishermen are overfishing to increase their returns directly, and the spillover effects are shared across the entire industry rather than just purely on that one fisherman himself. As a result, free market resources have continuously been exploited, and Hardin argued that the only way to change this is by educating the public and making them aware of the risks associated with overexploitation. So historically, fish stock is seen as unregulated open access resources, and that the value received from exploiting these resources suffers from diminishing returns. So this effectively means that fishermen don't account for the value of leaving the fish in the sea where they can reproduce. Instead, if they leave the fish in the sea under competitive pressures, another fisherman will just fish. Another fisherman under these competitive open access conditions will just simply catch the fish and gain the economic value from this resource. So, as a result of no property rights regarding the ownership of this fish, the economic profit associated with leaving fish in the sea is actually dissipated. So, as a result, a fisherman has no incentive to leave fish in the sea and allowing the fish to replenish. Okay, I have to define rebuilding for the purpose of my research, as the definition of it has such a broad scope. It could mean rebuilding the entire population to its historical level, or just rebuilding it to a sustainable level. So for the purpose of my research, I define rebuilding as rebuilding the bluefin tuna stock to a sustainable level where the annual harvest rate is below the maximum sustainable yield. So now let's get to the fun stuff. We'll discuss Gordon Schaefer's biological model. So the biological model enables us to estimate expressions for equilibrium levels of fish stock, effort, revenue, and resource rent. And it's often used to highlight the fisheries' ability to regenerate, and is used in fisheries management in order to develop sustainable regulations and policies. Okay, so let's look at the logistic growth function. This equation incorporates the intrinsic rate of population growth, the current population biomass, and the carrying capacity of the environment, which essentially creates a surplus production model that highlights a fisheries' ability to regenerate. So the natural growth rate, which is Fx, is a function of the stock's intrinsic rate, the carrying capacity K. So essentially the idea behind this model is to calculate the equilibrium where the losses in fish stock by natural or fishing mortalities is compensated by the increase in population through individual growth and recruitment. The next equation calculates the biomass of the species using the stock's natural growth rate, which was calculated before, in the equation above. So essentially, this equation simply takes the natural growth rate minus the population harvesting rate, which is a function of the fishing effort and catchability, to calculate the the growth rate of the stock. So both these models are used to calculate the maximum sustainable yield for a fish species. So the last equation, the MSY, is used in fisheries management to aid in the development of policies. So this looks at what level can we take of this. So how much can we harvest how much is allowed to be harvested from these fish to ensure that the fish is not being exploited. And it is just a function of the intrinsic growth rate, the carrying capacity, and it's just divided by 4. So next we can apply the Schaefer's model. This takes a biological Schaefer's logistic growth rate and applies it to an economical model. So it is recommended in this case that fishing occurs at the MEY. This is simply because at this point you're maximizing your resource rent as well as you're operating at a sustainable level and you're promoting conservational goals. However, a maximum amount of revenue is earned at your maximum sustainable yield. However, if your fishing effort exceeds the maximum sustainable yield, we believe that the total revenue will decrease. Okay, so economic models. To calculate the economic value of rebuilding a fishery, we simply have to look at the profit. So a simple profit function is used, which looks at the cost of the profit earned from harvesting a species minus the cost earned from harvesting a species. From there, we use a net present value calculation to take into account future revenues, as a basic net profit equation just looks at the short-term effects. So now let's look at the value of rebuilding the bluefin tuna fishing industry. So I've created 3 hypothetical scenarios that were based on considerations from different conservational parties. So the first is just based on the status quo, so it's just not changing anything, and that's just leaving the total annual quota at 5,000 metric tons per annum. But it is expected that under this strategy, this scenario, the whole fishing industry will collapse within 3 years. In the second scenario, we implement sustainable fishing regulations. However, the total effect of illegal, unregistered, unregulated fishing is not incorporated. So even under this method, as we are decreasing the supply of fish in the whole industry, demand pressures will cause the effects of illegal fishing to increase, and as a result, the fishery will collapse after 10 years. And then scenario 3 is the commercial wide ban on bluefin tuna fishing. The ban lasts for 5 years, enabling the stock to rebuild, and then afterwards, the fishing level returns to the status quo. So, let's look at my results. I calculated the net present value for each of these scenarios at a short-term rate, which is 3 years, and a long-term rate. So to do this, I use the ex-vessel price of bluefin tuna, which is currently at $1.03 per kg. So essentially, this price refers to what fishermen receive for their catch at landing point. I use ex-vessel price for purposes of practicality rather than exact profits. And then I also use a discount rate of 8% to represent the current cost of capital. So these results simply provide an understanding of the value created through rebuilding fisheries. They don't actually represent the exact figure. So, under scenario 1, the results actually support Hardin's theory of tragedy of the commons, as fishermen are maximising their short-term profits through overfishing. This is shown by the high net present value of 13 million. However, if you look at the long-term effects of overfishing, it has the lowest net present value out of all the scenarios. So overall, this is probably the most it's the least effective way to manage your fishery. Scenario 2 highlights the effects of a non-effective rebuilding strategy. So even through limiting annual catch, the fishery is still going to collapse after 10 years. So the long-term NPV is less than a sustainable fishery policy. And then, so scenario 3 really shows the long-term effect of rebuilding the fisheries as you're allowing the fish stock to rebuild. And to calculate the exact value out of these two scenarios, I use I minus the long-term net present value from scenario 3. Take the long-term net present value from scenario 3 minus the long-term net present value from scenario 1, and that equates to roughly $10 million in value. So essentially, these figures indicate that there is long-term economic incentives for fishermen to restrain from overfishing and enable the fish stock to rebuild to a sustainable level. However, there are a few limitations to my research. So you're probably now aware that fishermen do actually gain value by allowing the fish to rebuild, and essentially the value is gained by avoiding the collapse of the fishery of the fish stock. So one of the limitations of my research is that it was all based on hypothetical scenarios, and that my results cannot be used to represent the exact values of the exact value fisheries would gain through rebuilding the bluefin tuna stock. Secondly, I only consider the biological models. I don't actually implement them in my scenario development. So this would actually be required to accurately model the Pacific bluefin tuna, but because the data required for these models is industry specific and is very difficult to source. And lastly, another major limitation is that under scenario 3, I assume that fishing can return to status quo, but this may not be the case if the fish stock has not rebuilt to a level where the total annual catch is below the maximum sustainable yield. So then that would actually result in my net present values to be somewhat inaccurate. So essentially, the results that I have calculated are purely there to indicate that there is a long-term economic value created through rebuilding the fisheries, but just do not show exactly how much this value is worth. So I would like to sum up by saying that through the implementation of effective policies and regulations that aid in rebuilding the Pacific bluefin tuna stock, fishermen are able to gain a high level of economic value than gained through the current fishing practices. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. I hope you've learned something about fisheries management. Thank you very much.